for the City of Stevens Point Sustainability Commission, March 6th, 2025 at 5:30 p.m. I'll take the roll call for members present. We have Mayor Mike Wiesa, Allison Burr.
Here.
Sam Lang.
Here.
Heather Phillips.
Here, and it's Phelps.
Sorry. Robert McTish.
Here.
And Doug Stengel. Here. And Greg Knight, the chair, is also here. If there's anybody in the room right now that wishes to address the commission on a non-agenda item, now would be the time. If you have any comments you want to share with the commission that are germane to the Sustainability Commission's mission. Also, as we go through the agenda item topics, if somebody in the audience would like to make a comment or provide some information that's germane to the topic at hand, I will, if you raise your hand, I'll recognize you. We'll let the commission members have their discussion first, and then, if there's anybody that's here that wants to chime in, especially from our department presentation, we would encourage anyone from the department to, certainly participate in the conversation. So, with that, is there anybody here tonight, before we get started on the agenda items, that just wants to address the commission? Seeing none, we will move on to agenda item number 1, which will be a presentation by the Director of Public Works, Scott Doon. Discuss the department operations, give us, commission, an overview. I earlier last week had a meeting with Scott, just kind of give an idea of what the Sustainability Commission is about, our ordinance. So his presentation will be more or less oriented kind of along the lines of what we're trying to do.
Well, thank you. And again, I'm Scott Badoon, Director of Public Works. I do have a few other staff. Here with us one that was a bit surprised. Dave here, who's one of our operators. I know he won't be speaking tonight unless he really wants to. So next to him we have Chris Johnson, who's the street superintendent. He'll be speaking on some fleet and streets operations things here. And then we have Ernie Casada, who's our fleet manager, who is, I don't think he's planning to speak, but he's available to answer others, maybe more fleet-related specific questions. I thought it would be valuable that he's here. So as Chairman had said, what I am looking to do is I'll give a kind of an overview of what we do, just to make sure we're all on the same page, so we all understand what the function of Public Works is. I don't want to just make any assumptions of that everyone understands that. We're dealing with this stuff every day. So in that I will address the handout that I had, and then I'll go into just some of the general things there. And again, this is essentially kind of high level. I thought we could have tried to put together a whole bunch of graphs and tables and whatever else, and figured that really maybe wasn't where the commission was at, and would have taken a fair amount of time. That, and I don't really know what the interests are and where we're going. I'm not sure we all do. So, a matter of giving kind of a high level there, with the idea that then what sorts of things maybe after tonight or after talking to a few of the other departments, you either identify to say, hey, these are some of the initiatives we'd like to do. Can you come back and can you give us a bit more information on these things? Then we can kind of narrow our focus down, and we can put the energy into getting you more information that you might otherwise feel is necessary to start doing what we're going to do here. So if that sounds good with everybody, then I'll otherwise just begin with that. So what I have here, the handout, if everybody has a copy, and I think there are a few other copies if people in the audience are interested, is really just, it's online. It's actually right out of our budget book for the year. But I did think it was a relatively nice, concise summary of what we do as far as Public Works. And essentially, though, it kind of breaks down, if we're looking at it, again, at the high level, if you're not talking about Public Works, it's really taking care of everything that's within the right-of-way that's at the surface. And what's buried in there is the utility department. We're not that, but at the surface, so it's the roads, the curb gutter, sidewalk, take care of other terrace spaces there, signage that's in there, street lighting, signal things. So, we take care of all that. And then, however, in addition to that, we do have some other functions. So we do garbage and recycle collection. So we run the drop-off. So as well as then take care of fleet for essentially the entire community outside of the transit. So that's, I don't even remember that, a lot of vehicles. and a lot of different size vehicles.
342
Yeah, and I believe it's,
342.
I think it's in here as a value, $24 million worth of vehicles and equipment. So, that's, kind of what we do, as well as we provide a whole bunch of other functions. And we're kind of just the working arm of government here, so as other things come up, even for other departments that don't have necessarily the staff that we have and the ability to do things, we'll call up, one of the things that, Mayor Wiesa, asks, we just have come to accept that it is, and there are 2 pianos next door. When the time comes, we have the staff and the resources to do that, so, it may not have anything to do with the right of way, but we're just the ones available that have the ability and capacity to do that sort of thing. So we help out in other areas where we can, and we might be putting out, just like barricades or things for, other departments that may need it. Could be a community development. There's an incident at as has really happened, recently, vehicle might run off the road, run into vehicle. They say, hey, there's a safety concern here. Can we barricade off the sidewalk? So we'd be helping out in various things like that. So, what we otherwise do with that is kind of broken down. I won't go, in more detail really that if anyone's interested, but the various, unless someone has a specific question as to what it is, the activities are kind of more broken down in that, which is then, of course, the 2 different divisions in which we operate. And one is the streets, which we actually, don't do the things. We do the actual physical maintenance on the sidewalks and the curb and gutter in the streets. In that respect, we actually maintain the fleet. We have mechanics that do that. And then the other part is more so in the planning area, the engineering part. So we're, designing the reconstruction and the other improvements that we're otherwise, working at. And, sometimes if we can't do it, we're working with consultants to help us with that. So we're designing those improvements and we're planning those improvements out. And together we're working on kind of creating those plans as far as maintenance activities and what we do in that respect. So any general questions? I can spend I could spend the whole night here talking about this if you really want me to, but just trying to keep it again. Yes.
I'm curious what city pit operations is.
That's a good question. So we do operate off of Whiting Avenue. We have a pit, which is really not a pit as you might think of it as depression in the earth, but actually it's just a bunch of really mounds of dirt and gravel and other spoils and stuff that we maintain there. Right now, the front part of that is the new fire training center that they're building. We kind of pushed our stuff back to create that, so it's a little bit hidden, which is actually a good thing. It kind of distracts from people wanting to do that. Even when the snow falls, it's not uncommon that kids might want to go out there and try to sled. There's not otherwise many hills, but do that. But yeah, we keep a lot of our gravel there that we'll use for our various projects. We'll take our sweepings there when we come through with street sweeping, throughout the year. We'll actually temporarily put those so they can be sifted through and then disposed of or reused.
Thank you.
Any other questions before I move on?
What do you have for facilities? What I mean by that is buildings, et cetera, or are you co-housed with other departments, or what do you have?
So the engineering group is located in City Hall,
Okay.
so we're collaborated with them. The Streets Department, we have a facility, it's one complex campus of facilities. The primary just is the garage there up by Bucol Park, 106th Avenue. We have there, and then, on the site there is also our salt shed, sand shed, storage yards. We have fueling out there as well.
Drop off.
Yes, and the drop-off is out there as well. And all that is otherwise contained there. And that's really the only facility that we have, in addition to just, like I said, the operations we have at what we call the pit.
You said that was Bucol Avenue?
It's 106th Avenue is the address. It's basically kind of near the entrance of Bucol Park. Any other questions as far as what we do? Everyone have kind of an understanding of the function of Public Works?
And so it looks like you aren't responsible for any of the parks, that would be.
Correct. There's a separate department, Parks Department, to take care of the parks.
I'll just ask one quick question. In regards to garbage and recycling collection, so UWSP also has, I believe, garbage collection and some kind of recycling or mulching or whatever they do there. Is there any interaction or cooperation between the city and the university in terms of disposal or use of a landfill site? I imagine this stuff all goes someplace. Some of it gets recycled.
And no, I mean, we really don't work together in those respects. The exception otherwise to that is that they have a mulch blower that, they've offered to us to use. So it's a piece of equipment that if we needed to use, would actually probably be more suited for parks. We don't necessarily use a lot of mulch in what we do. We generate a lot of mulch of our own, because we'll take a lot of the brush that's brought up to us and we'll grind that into mulch. So if you're looking for a truckload of mulch, just look, we'll usually advertise in the spring for that. Yeah, we can always deliver that, but we don't typically use it. So the parks others would take some of that, but we typically don't have much of that. They take care of them, responsible for their own disposal. We're responsible for our own as well as for the citizens.
So I might ask a question, follow up on that.
Yes.
The university, we kind of operate on our own. Are there other large entities in Stevens Point that are operating on their own aside from the city?
So the large entities, I guess, in Pennsylvania, so what we provide is collection services for residential properties only. So all your commercial industrial stuff have to manage their own waste. And so essentially it's the brown cards that we otherwise issue. Residential, all of a sudden I'm trying to think, 'cause I'm getting it mixed up with water, is 4 or 5?
I'm sorry.
What constitutes residential?
Four.
4, right?
4 and more
Yeah.
4,
is commercial.
more than 4 is then, yes, commercial. 'Cause I know it's different than what utility is. I think that's 3. So, and that would be on a single parcel. So if it's otherwise in that range, so 4 units on a single parcel, tax parcel would qualify then as residential, and we would do collection there. Any others understand what we do? I said, I don't know what you don't know, so there's no dumb questions. I said, I could otherwise just try to drag this out for
Mine is not for
the next hour or that, but
question on, let's say, what you guys do. I'm just curious to, hear what is your department's, say, when you look at the goals of this committee, and meeting that, creating a baseline, and meeting that carbon neutrality goal, what is the biggest challenge to what you see going forward in your department to meet that goal on a citywide? Is it collaboration with other departments? Is it support? Is it like, I'm just curious what that answer is.
I'm going to get to that. If you'll otherwise give me an opportunity, I'll go through some of the initiatives and things we're doing, then I'll actually have Chris come up, and I think then together we can kind of answer that question, kind of where I was looking to conclude the evening in part, where, after talking about some of the things we're doing, and then talking about some of the things. And I think actually Chris probably holds some of the bigger challenges to what we have, so I'll let him address that more specifically. Any other questions?
Okay.
So I will start with this, which is kind of more from the engineering. Some of it kind of does roll over, but a little bit into, say, some of the streets operations and stuff as far as initiatives. Some of it I think is kind of more so in line, more specifically, seems fairly clear that might be in what the Sustainability Commission. Some of it may be kind of unperfect, but I want everybody to know more holistically what some of the things we're doing. And part of it is just to be able to toot our own horn a little bit. I must admit, I think we do some, do some things that may not be so kind of mainstream, like, oh yeah, this is exactly sustainability, but I do think it falls within that realm and should be recognized for the efforts that we're making. So I'll go with that, and then I'll turn it over to Chris, who can come up and he'll talk about some of the fleet stuff, and then as well as some of just the streets operational types of things. And these are essentially just kind of some of the activities they have that seem to fall in line with, call it, an overarching idea of sustainability. So starting specifically in the engineering realm, one of the things that we've otherwise taken to has to do with planning and design, which is comparative to decades ago. I mean, we're really looking to narrow our streets wherever we can. Doesn't mean that every street as exists today is going to be narrowed over what it is. Some of them are actually narrow, but many of our streets are oversized. And there's a lot of good that can come out of doing that. One, we're going to, of course, lower our overall costs of that reconstruction. We're also going to then decrease the impervious area while increasing the impervious area. And when we increase the impervious area, which is typically then the boulevard, the area between the curb and the sidewalk, of course now in many cases we're able to take area which may just be simply turf and increase enough space that now we can also plant trees. So we're working as much as we can to try to create those because we want to otherwise do that. So again, of course, that lower cost comes from, less materials that we need. So we'll still be using the same amount of curb, concrete and sidewalk concrete for that, because we really don't change it. So it's really just in that asphalt area in the center, but, it's less. And, if we're thinking about, heat island effects, stuff like that, less is better, right? But it also is going to help with some of the other things that we have to consider ourselves with, which is, as, climate change as it comes in, and, we just had nearly an inch of precipitation from yesterday's event. Where does all that go? Well, it's otherwise nice thing that if we have narrower streets, we're capturing less stormwater. Hopefully that, of course, we still have a bit of frost in the ground today, so a lot of that still is runoff. But, we're trying to do that so we can reduce then some of the localized flooding that can otherwise happen with those wider streets when you're collecting all that water and it has to go somewhere. And then one of the nice side effects of otherwise doing that too is that, narrower roads are generally safer roads. So if you put a narrow road and you especially have provisions for some parking, you get to some, parked cars, one side, both sides. Sometimes, both sides people feel really uncertain, can I make it through there? We basically work on a more theoretical, rather say that an average vehicle size is 6.5 feet. We go 28 feet, typically curb face to curb face, which if you do the math, basically says that you can fit 4 vehicles across there with a little bit of space between them. It's generally going to be too uncomfortable for people to want to do that, so it slows traffic down. So there's another benefit, beyond sustainability, that we find, with that is as well. And though, however, we do try to be contextual in that, it doesn't work necessarily everywhere. If you've got places that are always parked in heavy, like both sides, you typically don't want to narrow the street so much that no one feels comfortable, no one wants to go there. It becomes just a parking lot, and it kind of loses its value as a thoroughfare. Another initiative they have that really came down to us from the council, and they're fully on board, is just adding sidewalks in areas where we don't. Several years ago, we had several projects related to filling in some of the gaps. We still continue to look at that and try to find out where we can. The vast majority of, unless there's a kind of a reason why sidewalk just otherwise doesn't physically fit within the design, or if there's some other external reason that suggests that it shouldn't be there, which is rare but does happen, every new project has sidewalks that we try to do. And by new project, I usually indicate like new construction is going to have a facility of sorts to do that. To do that is our general premise. Anyone can look right away if you've been out to the new Forest Creek subdivision. You say, Scott, there's no sidewalks. That became kind of in that exception of trying to figure out how are we going to get that project done. So I like to think that's more the exception to the rule than the rule of really what our approach to projects are. But especially within the urban area, we continue to try to add more sidewalks where there aren't. And while, of course, there's the construction there, we're adding more, impervious, there. And someone can say, well, that's not a good thing. But we're really working in there is the active transportation. We're trying to make so people feel safe to do that. Now, that has a very positive benefit, not only just for our physical health, but it cuts down on those short trips that people want to make. So hopefully they'll be more comfortable, getting on to, the sidewalk and walking, those short trips versus getting in their vehicle and driving there. And so that's really the sustainability benefit for trying to do that. And I think we all know that. But, that's one of the things that we've really been trying to implement more and more. And while we might get a bit of pushback with residents that didn't have it before, because of course now I've got to maintain it, especially if I'm a snowbird and I go away, it's like, well, geez, I'm not even here to show it, so I'm going to have to pay someone. It's not perfect for everybody, but as collectively as a community, I think the benefits definitely outweigh the negatives there.
Just along that line, topic of sidewalks, so recently this winter, there was, I believe it's sponsored by the county, but that Safe Streets pedestrian bike plan date, I think?
Yeah, there's a Safe Streets and Roads for All grant that we have, so we're working with that. So that's kind of all encompassing things in the right of way. It's countywide. Part of that is an update to our bike and pedestrian plan, as well as, I'll have to look to Adam in the back, right, in the
Safety action plan.
The action plan, yes. So yes, we're looking at that. That's still another year off before we really have some solid type answers from that.
And, part of the input they were asking for there too was, where do you want to have sidewalks? What intersections need to be made safer for pedestrian and bike crossing? Kind of inputs like that.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought it was interesting looking at the City of Stevens Point's map, because there was a lot of notes on it of stuff to to do, you know, or things that people identified. And then I'm imagining that adds up to quite a bit of money, but would that be a plan then that your department would reference in terms of whenever you're looking at projects and then pulling out that plan and saying, okay, in this street that doesn't have sidewalk, people are calling for one, so is that the time that something like that may get implemented? or-
Yes, and we have two major types of projects. One is a reconstruction project where we're taking everything out, including the utilities, beneath the road, and putting it all back together. And then we also have just some resurfacing projects, which is really just intended to look at the pavement itself and try to, do something, with that. And definitely we'll use that plan for any reconstruct project, since we're basically going right away to right away and tearing it all out. We're always looking to say if sidewalks are part of that plan, and even times when they're not, because they're typically just identified that, yes, you should try to put sidewalks everywhere. It's the general thing. That's what was in the old plan. I expect something very similar. And then they try to prioritize some areas, so it gives us some, help and guidance as to where to work. And we do utilize that information in our thought process in prioritizing our other projects as well. So we use that bike and facilities, bike and pedestrian plan to, look at the facilities that exist there and then, prioritize one, so the example being if, two different roads in pavement condition being relatively equal, utility condition being relatively equal, we would prioritize the one that would be in need of, like it doesn't have sidewalks or bicycle facilities and it is called for. We would prioritize that one, over the other that maybe has those facilities already, even though maybe they say the pavement isn't as good in there. So it helps us prioritize that, and we try to plan those in. And then when we do resurfacing projects, and we also will look at that plan and identify areas. So we typically don't, go outside the pavement structure there unless there's, reason, to do so. But we'll look at the plan and identify, areas that they recommend, strongly that we have it, and we try to find areas to at least accomplish, some of that. So, if it's, if we're working in an area and it identifies a couple of blocks, maybe we're doing, 5 blocks, but there's 2 blocks of that maybe closer to a park or school or something like that we want to accomplish. We'll try to work that in, even though it's not necessarily our overall goal on that project, because it does add expense, and it's not, that type of project isn't necessarily intended. I mean, there's no hard and fast on that, of course, but just trying to get as much as we can to address the pavement issues is kind of where that pot of money, goes to. And so, but we will otherwise identify those and work in those areas as well. Then I'll get in a little bit of some of the things we do as far as roads after they're constructed, and these are some, generally relatively, new approaches that we've done. Here, one is it's a product called GSB 88 that we otherwise use. We typically use it in the first or second year after paving, and that would be for a reconstruct or a resurfacing project. And really, it's just an asphaltic layer. It's just an emulsion that's put in over the asphalt, and so it's very thin. It dries within, depending upon the weather, of course, but even on a cooler, cloudy day, probably within a few hours to get there. And the reason we otherwise do that is because asphalt itself, if you don't do something with the asphalt, eventually there are several things that are not good for asphalt. And I'm guessing there's someone in the audience that knows a lot more about this than even I do, and will correct me if I make a mistake. But UV is not good for asphalt. Water is not good. I mean, water is the worst thing otherwise to get in there. So we otherwise use that, and what we've seen, happen, we've tested it out years even before I started here, and it just seems to always work. Is we put that on, and what it actually does is it kind of helps hold the fines in between the aggregates. So if you saw 2 of the different streets, one that was treated with this product, one that wasn't, several years after, what you would probably see at first might look very similar. You'd probably see the polished off aggregate, at the very top surface. But if you actually got down on your hands and knees and you looked at it, you'd see something very different. And one of the things you'd see is and if you felt it with your hand too, you see the untreated one, essentially, would feel more rough. You could feel that the fact that the fines between those larger pieces of aggregate are actually starting to wash away and loosen up. And yet in the treated one, you can always feel, and even though those stones are polished, you have a much more uniform stream that is sealing off that area between the aggregates and helping to prevent, the UV damage, helping to prevent the water from infiltrating through there and doing additional damage. And that then extends the whole life, starting at the very beginning of the asphalt, which is fine. I know it's, let's see, was it Dr. Wood out of Minnesota is probably one of the most that's done the research, has identified that, with asphalt turns, you should do something within the first 3 years of its life to preserve it. Once you get into year 4 or so, the tensile strength of your asphalt starts to drop down. So you need to do something to seal it off, to prevent the UV, to prevent the water from getting in there. Typically, what we would otherwise do is use a chip seal, which I'll talk about next, but we find that for a fraction of the price, we're using this product, and it allows us to then extend out when we do our chip seal while keeping the road in reasonably good shape. So, we're spending a little bit of money getting what we believe is a lot of benefit till we do that next, pavement maintenance. And so, and with that, so I'll move into that. So what we've otherwise then gone to, so in about year 7 after that, we do what's called a chip seal, and what we've added to that more recently is a fog seal. And, we've probably all seen chip seals. I mean, the county does them, everybody does it. It's a very, very popular, means to maintain an asphalt road. So we otherwise do that because then we can get in there, because that's about the time you're starting to see some of those cracks form, so we'll crack fill it, and we'll chip seal, and we'll give it some more life, gives it some, also a new surface drive on. So if it is getting a little bit polished, we got some friction there again. And we add that fog seal is one of probably the newer differences that we made here. And what we're so far finding, and we're still kind of comparing things there, is that it does a couple things. One, it locks the chips in, which really isn't sustainability so much, is the fact that you can drive on it sooner and there's less of it that kicks up to do that. But what it also does is that, we're told, it's much like that GSP. So this fog seal is just a different type of emulsion. It's very similar but yet very different as far as its properties to the GSP-8, but it does that. So in addition to locking it, it gives us another layer of this waterproof and UV protection. And while it wears off, and otherwise in a few years, again, polishes off, it's just that we find that it always helps to keep those, newer, and just the whole chip seal seems to hold up better longer, is what we're finding, and we're still, so we've just started it a few years ago, so we're going back every year, we kind of look at some of the other ones, and that's what we're discovering. It seems to be working. So again, that adds just a little bit more to chip seal, but we're getting some, again, more benefit. And that whole process, GSB-88, chip seals like that, is helping us to extend the life of those roads. Because, doing nothing, that pavement's, really, it's like, depending upon where it is here, sandier soils, we do have clay soils on the north side, even that, I'm like, you can probably do absolutely nothing with it and get 20 years, out of it. You start to do some more, and then you start to extend it, and then you can see how you're moving, money down the road, if you can get there. I truly think the way we're starting to build roads these days, and unfortunately, I'm not going to be around to see it, but I think we're going to be pushing that 40, 45, year mark to get there by continuing to do that and get there before we're getting there doing this major work. And the reason that that's otherwise, kind of important, I bring that up, is that when I first started here and the math was kind of done before me and handed to me to that, is, trying to look at the dollars and cents of it, is to try to put us on a 30-year cycle. So in essence, we build a road in year 0, 30 years later we come out and we resurface it. 30 years later we come back, we resurface it. And then in year 90, we come in and we rebuild the whole road again. And so what we are truly trying to do, and only time truly will tell that, is to try to skip one of those resurfacings if we can. We want to try to get closer to that, because we also don't know, the cost of construction keeps going up and up and up. It's exceeding, just, normal inflation. I think it's plateaued, of course, more recently, but trying to get ahead of it, we don't know what the future is. But the one thing we otherwise know is that the better we can build our roads, the longer they last, the more we're going to save money. And so that's really one of our goals. So these are a couple of things that we otherwise, do with that to help out. Then the next step is, and we try to look at resurfacing some of those roads. One of the things that we've otherwise been shared with American has otherwise kind of helped educate us in this American asphalt, is that is, in many cases we're looking to add fiber. So we have fiber reinforced asphalt instead of just typical asphalt that we've been using. And there's a couple of nice benefits of doing that. One is that instead of maybe putting in a 2.5 inch lift, we can reduce that lift. It might be 1 3/4 inches or something like that. Well, that's less tonnage we need to put down to get there. So, that's also equates to even just fewer truckloads that need to show up to put that down. The other benefit of it is that that fiber helps expand. So if you're doing it oftentimes as like a mill, you mill the surface off, overlay it with this, then what it helps to do is you might have cracks still in that lower layer of asphalt you're paving over, but because you have the fibers that kind of hold it together, you don't necessarily see as quickly, necessarily as wide as the cracks that may be beneath it. So it helps hold that asphalt together. And that's definitely a good thing, because now we're hopefully getting, you're having a better ride, you're getting less water in there, it's easier to otherwise maintain. Again, it's lasting longer. So after we might get to year, could be like 15 or so like that, we might, do some of these, things like that. Slightly more cost, but it's all often, offset with the fact that you're using less of it. And we're finding that. One of the first ones we did actually was Country Club Drive, when we were working with the township to do that. And originally we were talking to that, we were thinking that we were doing, like maybe a 4 or 5 year fix. And we do have some grant funding through the town actually secured to get there. Should be taken care of, this year to repave it. And I don't think anyone on either side thought that it would actually be as good as it still is. And the difference of that is the fiber, because that was one of the fiber, and that's what's really holding that road together and it's lasting much longer. So it's proven itself there. So we're looking otherwise to do that.
So just to clarify,
Yes.
is that something you're now doing regularly every time you're resurfacing a road, or is that still
No.
not so often?
No, I would say it's more often. It's the approach we like to take. Sometimes we look at, really what we're doing, and it might actually, quite honestly, it may just be funding related. What can we necessarily afford to do with how much are we trying to accomplish, that we might have to maybe use a little bit of it here, but we can't necessarily do the entire, scope of the work that we're trying to do to get there. But wherever we can, we try to do it. And in some cases, if it's lower traffic like that, it might others be nice, but some of those roads just by themselves, because the other thing that will beat up a road is the amount of traffic you have, on it. And so if you have some of those kind of more so, call it remote, even within the urban area, you have some of those little cul-de-sacs and whatever that don't see much traffic and aren't going to see a lot of heavy traffic by any means. That may not be, you got to weigh out the cost of, because a lot of times you're going to get some pretty good life out of that with just the general maintenance like that. So it may not be, but oftentimes our first thought is always to look at fiber reinforced and then try to convince ourselves the reason that maybe it's not appropriate in this case. Particularly because I know we've used it recently, Business Park in there when we had to mill that, when that started to crumble, we did that. That's all fiber reinforced. I can't think of one that lately that hasn't been fiber reinforced as far as the surface. There, I look back there, I can get confirmation. Yes?
What kind of fibers are you talking about? In my world, fibers means like cardboard, and I'm like, that doesn't seem like it would help a road stay well together, so.
So
I'm
I
like,
don't
yeah,
know really the
fibers.
makeup of it. It's fiberglass, right? It's a glass fiber, generally speaking?
It's fiber and there's plastic
Plastic,
in it
yeah.
as well. It's,
Right.
the concrete industry has been using it for quite some time. It's basically same product. It just reinforces the asphalt.
Okay, so, I didn't misspeak on anything, did I?
No,
Okay,
not at
good.
all.
Then, I guess like the last, unless there's other questions, then I guess in this realm here, kind of the last thing there is recycled material. And this actually, how much the whole thing, one of the things they have, because we're talking about our pit operations, one of the things you always see there is, a big pile and there's concrete on it here, there, and chunks of asphalt. And we take that and recycle. Right now, there's a big pile of gravel out in front of it, and that gravel is actually all recycled material from past projects. And, we would always have someone come in and crush that for us, and then it can others, reuse it. Even beyond really what we do, when we're looking, say, at the mill and overlay projects there, is that, there's already a percent of recycled material in the asphalt we're buying. When we're otherwise gonna mill and say, American will come in and be the contractor in that, they're gonna take those millings away and they're gonna reuse them in some capacity. So that stuff doesn't get, to a landfill. And so when we otherwise have projects, oftentimes we will benefit even from a contract price standpoint if, depending upon the contractor, have the capacity to do crushing, which is exactly how we ended up with that pile, last year, is just that we had a contractor who had the capacity to do it, and we brought in probably, more material. We used a lot of that material on those projects already, and not only is it just, nice that we can use what we have there, but of course then we're reducing, any sort of landfilling, whether it's actually a commercial landfill or just trying to provide someone with, clean fill if they would so choose that it would be suitable for them. But then also it's a lot less trucking, because if we need to go get gravel and we can utilize what we have right in our pit versus going to say the WIMI garage, which, what's the round trip to go to WIMI? Dave, I'm putting you on the spot. I know you didn't come here to speak.
15.
Sure.
I would say,
Probably
probably,
half hour for you.
I would say half hour at least, right?
28 miles.
Oh, Ernie
Actually,
knows.
29 and a half, because
Okay.
it's a mile and a half from my
Good.
house.
So of course, if we can otherwise use that and keep that material here, I mean, we're saving time, and that's also just, employee time to otherwise go do that. So if that's all the farther we need to go, and then if we have that material available too, and we can offer it up to our contractors, depending upon how much we might need it for our own purposes and what they have, we're gonna get discounted prices from them as well, because now, essentially they're getting the material for free, and their trucking costs are far, far less. So instead of maybe paying $5, $6 a ton here, we may pay $1 a ton, just essentially is just the trucking between it. So that's otherwise another way that it benefits the city in general.
Do any, private buildings or demolition from private structures and stuff, are those used by the city to recycle as part of this program, or?
If we're otherwise,
Does that go somewhere else?
It can go that way. Typically, again, it depends really, in the sense who the contractor is, how the contract is set up. For example, I don't know where they found an outlet to it when Edgewater Manor came down. I mean, that was one thing that we were always looking at there. I think one of the issues there is whether or not they could meet the spec that we needed to it with the material they had, but we did talk to them about trying to recoup that. Of course, the benefit to their contract would have been is that, because I don't know where they're taking it to, and they were looking for someplace close. So, would have been a great deal for us had it worked out. Unfortunately, it didn't, for them just to take it down the road and dump it there for material that we could use. When Shopko came down, we talked to Best, was the contractor there, about it. It was slightly different in how the arrangement was set up there and the contracting was. In their particular case, they were otherwise planning to crush it. Their whole contract in part was based upon the reuse of materials and stuff. So of course they were looking to be compensated for it. Unfortunately, we just had our own crushing operations going down. It would have actually been a reduced price, reasonable pricing to get it. But the problem is that our pit was so full of things there with crushing equipment and other contractors using it, we just didn't have a place to put it at the moment to work with it. But we do that. We actually get a fair amount from our residents and stuff to bring if you are tearing out a driveway and stuff. I mean, that stuff can be dropped off with us. We get a lot of that. Sometimes the commercial ones are saying, hey, I'm looking for a place. If it's otherwise clean and suitable like that, we typically say yes, we'll take it, because why wouldn't? We don't know where else it's going to end up when we actually have a benefit to take it when we crush. Doing a few other things which I think will otherwise go a little bit faster here, and then I'll wrap up and turn over to Chris. One of those things kind of on the periphery is utility coordination. Like we try to do a number of activities for them. So right now, what we're actually, when we do any of our major projects, we're working with them to try to figure it out, and it actually helps us to do some of the prioritize as well. We're talking about bike ped plan earlier, working with utilities to try to make sure we're doing that. And of course, that's going to help us. We're not doing rework. No reason that we're taking care of a road, on the north side of town there because the pavement is bad, and we feel that that's where our energy needs to go, and the utilities are identifying something, right around the corner here that they need to otherwise get into. So we're always trying to coordinate those activities because we don't want others to get in there. And we also don't want the fact that we go in and do a road, for example, even just over here when we milled and overlaid Jordan up here, it's like we'd hate to think that we come in and do that, and then shortly thereafter, within a few years, they're coming in, cutting open and doing it. Now we've got a lot of rework, just a lot of extra cost, that others goes into that. And then of course with that is just all the, we've already got, why are we tearing out good asphalt when we do that, and the energy and stuff that goes with that. One of the specific activities that we have there is the utility patching, which we just started this past year. We've got a little mini paver now and do some of our own patches, and that actually helps us, quite a bit in a variety of different places. One is that, we others control that we're not waiting for American, who's, their business is to do the big stuff. They do the small stuff, but it's like trying to fit it into their schedule. They're not going to drive from wherever, give up a project over here to do that. So when it kind of fits in their schedule, they work with that, and that's understood how to do that. But at times they get busy, and those things others don't happen. So we got the mini paver. We can then control a bit about how we approach that and do it. And one of the benefits that maybe is overlooked by many people is just the fact that we get to them faster. So one is like, because some of the other ones, you wait a few weeks, you get a heavy rain in there, we're out there trying to take care of it, people are getting damage to their cars, people are trying to slow down to approach these things like that, and they're slowing down, speeding up. We get out there and get it in traffic, otherwise, flows. So, and that's really ultimately what we want. So it has benefits over beyond just what we can do, here, working with them on that factor, one, lower their costs, while we can otherwise do that and control what we're doing. But it's just the timeliness of stuff, which I think helps the community at large as well. And I think there's even, you find probably, fewer vehicle, less vehicle damage, fewer even, quite honestly, emissions from that, from just people always trying to slow down, wait for these things to get up and speeding up. Around those same things, and there's a gentleman here to my left who's not going to like to hear this, but roundabouts are actually a good thing because they reduce unnecessary stops and they keep traffic moving, which reduces fuel emissions. And that's one of the benefits that they otherwise provide. And to go into one of the future things I want to talk about here. LED light conversions. We've got a good percentage of that. I don't know we've got it. The individual who used to take care of that left some records. Chris, do we ever get just roughly? It's a little over half, I believe.
I believe
Like
we
maybe
are
60%.
we are over half.
3% of our previous high pressure sodium, lights, high wattage, like 400 watt bulbs have been replaced with LEDs. I think all the larger ones, I think where we left might be some 150 and less, as I recall, wattage that we still need to do. So we still have some things to go on there, but we're reducing that. Of course, we just have there's a direct electric savings by doing so.
Is that, I'm just curious, is that like a lighting ordinance or something that's gone into effect, like, or something like that, or, okay? It's just
Yeah.
something
It's essentially reducing some of the older streetlights that we had, like some of those wattages, could be pretty high, some of them, 400, I think we even had some 600 watt.
We had a few, but yeah.
Which is very high wattage if you're comparing it to like what you might have in your house, like typically 40 or 60. And essentially the LEDs reducing those to like, around 100 in some cases smaller. So it's a significant reduction of energy use going to the LEDs.
Does the city own all of the streetlights, or are some of
No.
them still owned by WPS?
Yes. So
Most
yes.
are still owned by
Most are.
WPS.
Most, yes. And so, just generally speaking, there may be a few exceptions. So I can think of some concrete poles. If it's on a metal pole, it's most likely the cities. If it's on a wooden utility pole, it's WPS's.
Are there, how to say, opportunities right now to work with such a thing like WPS to, like, will we just ask, and give
So,
us LEDs?
yes, I need to otherwise
Run that
confirm
through-
what they had. They used to have a program that basically offered us, I think it was 17 free conversions a year at request. And then, of course, as they go through and update their infrastructure, they're here doing a project, if they're doing relocations, as we're doing road construction stuff, then they'll address those, existing lights as well. But yes, there has been a program to allow us to do that on an annual basis, to make those change outs.
So just to clarify quickly, when you say 50%, do you mean 50% city-owned or 50% total?
City-owned.
Thank you.
It's also important to note that we pay a fee per light to WPS. I don't remember what it was.
It varies a little bit. It's around like
$20
$20 to $25, depending upon the wattage and all.
Monthly or yearly?
Monthly. So yes, our bill is very big, WPS. And then lastly on those things is our signal timing studies. And actually, we're due for another one here too. And the reason that that's otherwise important is that, traffic changes over the years. So, like about every 5 years or so, we like to do another study to get there because we want to make sure that our signal timings work. We have, many of the corridors and we want to make sure that, we're getting efficient flow there. I mean, I think every one of us has probably experienced it. And it does happen when things get a little off kilter. Clocks kind of go off, and even this morning, Chris, pay attention. So I was coming up, I got stopped at Nebel Street, I got stopped at Michigan Street, I got stopped at Heffron. And it's all those extra stops and gets. So we try to always get there to see as traffic changes to get there. Yeah, to get there. Because really what we're trying to do is keep traffic flowing. Because we know, there's a lot of emissions when the vehicles are otherwise just, stopped for no reason. And so what we want to do is just try to keep traffic flowing as best we can and balance out all the directions. So there's always going to be delay. I mean, that's, in essence, signal lights are going to create that. But we're trying to balance it out and make sure that the vast majority of traffic is moving as close to free flow as they otherwise can. Because that's, of course, the ideal scenario. Everyone would love if you could drive around and you never had to stop. I mean, that's the perfect scenario. We unfortunately can't always get to that. But we do try within those major corridors where the signal lights are, in different corridors, is to try to get those signals, timed out as well yet, so you have as few stops as possible. And of course, that just helps, mostly with the emissions. And then just a few other things as far as like things otherwise that we're considering, so kind of going around with even the roundabouts, is uncontrolled intersections. It seems like over the years, we've got a lot of time, people like their stop signs, and people like stop signs for a bunch of reasons, many of which have nothing to do with traffic control, unfortunately. And there's actually a lot of data that supports the fact that uncontrolled intersections can actually be safer than controlled intersections under certain conditions, especially certain traffic volumes. And there's a number of reasons, for that. But the other thing is just that if you're stopping at a stop sign and you do go through 2-3 times a day and there's never traffic, you start to question, why am I stopping? But if you're still stopping, it takes more. There's more emissions related to that. You've got to stop. You sit there for a while, and then you've got to accelerate up. And those are the things that burn more gas versus just being able to drive through. So to look at that. But if you only had to basically yield at those and slow down and know what you're doing, it says you do that. Now the safety really comes in is that if you have an uncontrolled intersection and you're driving a route, which is really the basic premise of how a roundabout functions, is the uncontrolled intersection, only just more streamlined, is the fact that if you're following the rules of the road, you approach that intersection cautiously, and then you give to the right-of-way, which is where the term right-of-way comes from. Person otherwise approaches to your right, you give the right-of-way to them. Do that. So it can be safer because what it does is it tries to create the driver to pay more attention to what's actually happening around them. Otherwise, what we find, driver behaviors oftentimes is, can be that, if I start to see a stop sign, I stop to pay attention to it because, doggone it, every time I see one, there's never any traffic. Why am I stopping? Which creates a dangerous situation if they're truly not paying attention. Then, the other, and they'll start to take that in other places too. We just find that there's less respect for the stop sign and people will roll through them in other areas. So it does create otherwise less there. The other aspect that of course now I actually lost, I apologize, I just lost, I had two things right there. I'll try to think of the other one.
So just question for
Yes.
clarification. So by an uncontrolled intersection, you do not mean an intersection with like 0 signs anywhere?
0 stop signs, yes.
Okay, 0 stop signs, but.
Yes, there could be, and then control could even be like yield. So we otherwise move to some more yield control, or in some cases, fully uncontrolled, no stop signs. It's just allows traffic to flow, and what that does is, of course, reduce emissions if people can just approach slowly, stop only if you need to, and then otherwise proceed. Like I said, and they can be safer. So one of the things that I'd like to do is actually, study, I'm not qualified enough to do that, but look at some of those other things, look at some of the warrants, because stop signs by the MUTCD, which is the governing book, that's the Manual of Uniform Traffic Control Devices. It's basically the federal law that governs all pavement markings and signage, all of our traffic control. Stop signs are supposed to meet warrants. There are certain specific warrants there as far as traffic volumes and stuff and what you're trying to accomplish, because a stop sign is a traffic control device. So we use that. I don't know where the history of many of our stop signs, but I've observed some of these, and there's not enough traffic on some of these to warrant stop. I can just counting them there. There's not enough traffic to warrant stop signs. So I don't know. Like I said, many times people will put them up simply because residents will request them. People request them because they want a stop sign. Maybe they want to control speeding, which is not the purpose of a stop sign. Do that, especially if you're trying to control speeding with a stop sign. That's where you do get people like, why am I stopping? And they otherwise don't stop, which is a safety issue. But the other part related to this is the fact that you're causing people to stop when it's not necessary. And so, if you others think if traffic could continue to move and didn't stop as often as they did, I don't honestly have the answer, but how much emissions could we reduce if we could just keep traffic moving? And I've got to think the number is something quantifiable. So I think it's otherwise worth looking at that. Now there is, of course, getting maybe a little ahead beyond what we have, there is a challenge of that because this is the other point I was going to make. The issue that we otherwise have in partly doing that is it's sometimes difficult to indicate to drivers like, okay, there's no longer a stop sign. There's no official sign that says there's no stop sign ahead any longer, if you're headed for it. And, we kind of get in this mindset, which is the unfortunate thing, this is the other behavior that people, experiencing more and more, is that if I'm approaching an intersection, I don't see a stop sign. Many drivers these days, in fact, it seems to be the majority of drivers, assume that they don't have to stop, that the side street stops for them. And they don't pay attention, and they just kind of go through. So converting them has its challenge because you need to alert people to the fact that it's changed and that they otherwise approach it. Because if you simply pulled stop signs and let it go, you'd probably have a fair number of accidents. And someone would say, well, wait a minute, they always used to stop before, and they're not going to have paid attention. Then it's just there's a couple things that we're understanding. So one of the things, of course, which is going to be otherwise big within here, are just green materials. And really, we can't generate those ourselves, so we're really just trying to follow the market to see what it is. And we could probably speak a little bit on how asphalt works in that, but, you know, we always know with everything, you know, the world's constantly changing, new technologies come about, you know, to see that, and I've got to think that in the not too distant future, you know, there's going to be yet greener asphalt, there's going to be greener concrete, there's just going to be greener materials that we can otherwise utilize that when they're, you know, available on the market. At the moment, many of them otherwise don't exist, there's still a lot of research and things going on, but it's something that we're constantly trying to, you know, look into and to see if there are opportunities for us. And if ever approached with an opportunity, which just even like the fiber, like, hey, here's a different, to do that, you know, we're always willing to listen to someone, you know, in the industry to tell us that we can look at something different and give it a try. And the last thing on, unless someone has a question.
Yeah,
you heard
here's
something.
on that, like, I was looking at these things called grass grids.
Hmm?
Is that, say, something that's just not appropriate for our climate or something, or?
Well, I mean, in certain areas, like if you're doing parking, they're probably most appropriate, you know, for that, especially in a lot of residential stuff. They can have their challenges if installed properly. They can work rather well, but they do work, generally speaking, you know, again, installed properly for like driveways and parking areas. To do that, you know, similarly, if you're looking at some of the stormwater challenges you have, is, you know, like permeable pavements and stuff, that does become more of a challenge that, you know, in our climate, simply because you can, you know, you have to clean it out because you know, we use sand and salt, and try to get there, you get some freeze thaw actions for that, which can break apart. You also get some blinding because you'll get sand in those, you know, permeable pavements. But they can be utilized in areas where, say, if you're not applying that, like the, you know, like you could do it, say, use a standard asphalt approach in the drive lanes of a parking lot and use like a permeable pavement. The others provided, you know, because you're not necessarily throwing sand and salt into the parking areas, because oftentimes it's parked, you're cleaning the rest of it, so you just plow the rest of it off and do that. So that has an approach. I know places still typically down south, you know, farther here, you know, do that. I mean, they're generally more applicable there when you get out of the colder climates like we have here. But there's probably applications for it.
They are allowed, as you know, in residential properties for driveways and parking lots. Actually, commercial as well, just not on roadways yet.
And then lastly, which I think Chris will talk a little bit on here as far as his question was asked, facility is you know, public works facility, something that we've been exploring a little bit. Ours is 61 years old. Even others today, talking to architects, you know, the average life of a facility like that is usually considered to be about 40 years. So it's a little bit outdated, it's a little bit undersized, and, you know, so we're using 1960 whatever, you know, like vintage efficiencies, you know, within that facility, as well as just its layout and stuff is not necessarily the most efficient for operations of what we're doing. So it's something they have. Quite honestly, it's a big ticket item. There's no way, you know, around that, and so it's a matter of trying to find feasibilities and trying to look at some other things. You know, what I would actually even ask of this, you know, commission, as we others looked at and talked to some of the other departments, is that trying to figure out how we can, you know, utilize that, because I'm hoping that what's good for us is good for someone else as well, and maybe what someone else is working on might benefit us, and looking for ways that we can share our resources and do whatever and look for those opportunities, you know, to do that. You know, because I'm not saying that thinking that we just need a facility that only houses, you know, public works, you know, to do that, or if someone else has room for us to do that, we can shift some of our operations to do that. But it'd be nice to think that we could find something that may be more efficient, you know, to do that and have opportunities for, you know, some changes. I don't know how much we would want to invest into a facility that old to try to upgrade some things. I'm not sure we would get our money back out of.
Is there an obvious sort of like, say, sharing facilities, like, we got a couple of departments that have fleets, trucks, like, does something make obvious sense that, like, all right, we really only need one garage for, you know, this department, this department, this department, because they all basically the same equipment.
Right. Yeah, and I mean, in that long line, you're really looking at, you know, the three things. Whether you can tie utilities into it, utilities, you know, streets, parks, you know, the ones that have some things. You know, then otherwise we're sharing mechanics already. You know, if we have otherwise, you know, central fueling, which we do, we always have that. You park that, you could probably then get more economies of scale regarding to your garage and spaces there, as well as then just, you know, working with, you know, with each other, trying to utilize our, you know, our labor resources as well, you know, and sharing each other versus being in satellite areas. Those are probably the benefits of others having, in addition to just having the efficiencies of a new building and some of the opportunities that might others be there. I wouldn't even think to be adding, solar, say, to our existing facility. Just the basic structure is never even intended for something, like that, as nice as it might sound to do that. But a new one, of course, we can start to do that. We can get into green, we can get into energy efficiencies, in doing a facility that.
Do we have a master facility plan for all the city facilities, or is it more or less by department, or?
So
how does that
there is no masters. We are actually working on something right now to try to create that. There was an allocation in the capital budget, $50,000 maybe, to do that, which isn't a whole lot of money to do that, but should be able to get, something at least put onto paper and get started in that realm, to look at it. To what extent that scope of work at that cost, can get, we'll see, but it'll start to take us down that path, see, what do we have today, what do we need to replace, what will we need in the future through that, because that's, of course, one of the biggest questions I think that we all have is like, what are we not talking about today that we should be, that we need to plan for in, say, 20 years?
And what's the timeline on them working on that plan?
So, well, we're trying, kind of as
When it
soon as
gets
we
done.
can, yeah. It's,
It's one of those things where there's not a set timeline. We do have an existing inventory. We know what all of our buildings are, what they do, when they were built, the square footage, all of those things. But when we talk about future planning, there's not one specifically for those buildings. So we're in the process right now of getting everything from the department heads in regards to what sort of space do you see yourself needing? Not where, not even cohabitating at this point, but what do you think you're gonna need going forward for the next 10 years, 20 years, 40 years?
and so that's part of that. I realize I've probably taken up more of your time, but again, I could talk all night long. I like talking about this, but Chris is going to be much more efficient in having to talk about the fleet component
I'll make it quick.
and to do that. And then I apologize, I have the PIM going on next door. So I'm going to run next door. If something does come up through this, just send someone over. I can definitely come back, but I just want to go check in on how things are going over there. So thank you very much for your time. I appreciate it. And
Mr. Chairman, if I could, before you go, well, you can go, I guess, but before Chris comes up, I gotta tell you, the director's underselling himself. There are a lot more things that are going on in that department relating to sustainability than there was time to bring up, and I just want to highlight a few of them. First of all, something as simple as a compost drop-off, or a yard waste drop-off, or a branch drop-off, saves us emissions, time, and equipment. Because normally, like for a leaf collection or Christmas tree collection, our trucks have to drive around every city street. We have to hit every street, even though only one or maybe none on that street have something out. But we have to check. By having a drop-off, that allows people to bring things to a central location only when they need to, only when they have to, and it saves all the emissions that would be required for us driving up and down the streets. Same thing with composting. We tried considering a community compost, but working with Bucket Ruckus now, we're diverting tons of compostable, usable material that would normally just get sent to the landfill. We have to pay for that. We have to pay for hauling that. We have to pay per ton, and we're reducing that. One thing Scott didn't touch on in engineering is GIS. 5 years ago, when there was an accident, let's say there's an accident at 4th and Division, okay, and streetlights are taken out and signs are taken out, but we don't know what. So someone gets in a truck, maybe more than one person gets in a truck, they drive out there, they see, okay, that stoplight's out, we missed a stop sign here, there's a yield sign, whatever it is, okay, now they go back to the truck, drive back to the shop, grab the things they need and come back out. Maybe they forgot something, so they're going back a second time. With everything on GIS, we can now get a call that says, hey, there was an accident at 4th and Division. You bring it up online at your desk. Okay, there's a stop sign there, 2 signal lights, a yield sign, and a slow children playing. You load that in the truck, you make one trip. The same thing is true with our tree inventory. Every city tree in a public right-of-way is on GIS. So we know the species of that tree, when it was last trimmed, so we don't have to drive around saying, oh, that one looks like it needs to be trimmed, call in Joe with a chainsaw and make two trips. All of those things are reducing the amount of not only staff time, but the amount of fuel that we need to burn going back and forth and the wear and tear on the equipment. So all of those things are very relevant to some of the milestones that we've achieved in sustainability, just in engineering. And I know Chris is gonna talk about the GPS and the trucks. That was a huge deal too. Figuring out routes so we don't have 7 plow trucks going down the same road. When they leave the shop, they can go to different areas. The garbage pickup the same way. All of those are creating efficiencies that save us fuel, time, resources. A couple of things that you need to point out though, or I need to point out because there's potential pitfalls in here. We're talking about how the council made a commitment to putting in sidewalks. Great, but as the director will tell you, if concrete was a country, it would be the 3rd largest producer of CO2. So there's downsides to it. You can't be carbon free if you're putting in concrete. It just doesn't work that way. So by adding sidewalks, you're also creating carbon. And one of the things that we do to offset that is we plant way more trees than we take down every year. Every single year, we put in hundreds of more trees than we take out. And that helps cool the place and suck up some of that CO2 that we're contributing. So all of your decisions have to weigh both of those things, right? What's the good that we're doing, and does it outweigh the bad that inevitably happens? Alderperson, you asked Scott what the biggest challenge was from that carbon neutrality thing, or carbon clean energy. And I whispered to one of the guys over here, well, one of the biggest drawbacks is there's not a practical electric excavator. And those are the things that, it's technology, I think, that's gonna be our biggest obstacle into making that happen. That's it, I'm gonna cut out too.
Thank you, Mayor.
Thanks, Chris.
So again, Chris Johnson with the Streets Department. I'm one of the superintendents over at Streets, and again, that's Ernie, who is our fleet manager. I guess I can start. I don't think I'm gonna take about an hour. I'll kind of tone her down a little bit. And please ask questions. I work very well with questions, but kind of the low level view of Streets, or I guess rather high level view. All the things that Scott talked about, in the engineering, the planning world, once that infrastructure is put into place, it's really we're the boots on the ground, maintaining it. Right now we're really starting our pothole season, which is fun. So it's our guys that are going out doing various different types of patching on the potholes, depending on the road, concrete, asphalt. We have a couple different tools, so to speak, that we can use on a lot of our concrete roads, especially our really bad concrete roads, Church, Division. A lot of that is, we call it Trumbull. It's basically like a roofing tar that we mix in with some pea gravel, and it's to fill all those voids, all those concrete pops out. So we have a crew out that does that really from this time of year throughout the season. Especially again with some of our really bad roads like Main and Division. It's a constant cycle. And with those roads being done, it's not necessarily something that we want our concrete crew to go out and repair everything, because we're not in the business of rebuilding the roads. That's engineering's kind of forte, to get them put together, and it would be very costly for us to do all the repairs that would need to be done. But we do have a concrete crew, which is a different, sometimes they operate as a patch crew. Wes Clark, just across the bridge last year, we did quite a bit of work, joint repair, where we actually will cut out the really bad areas, because the road longevity is going to be long enough that it's worth us to go out and repair those, as well as just cold patching. That's just it's a kind of a soft asphalt that we can just put right into. We do that sparingly. We don't like to use cold patch. It doesn't tend to last very long. It's usually just a good middle of winter, kind of get something in there to smooth the road over. From a sustainability standpoint, some of our patching mentality's changed over the last couple of years. We did purchase an infrared patcher, which is like a big giant grill essentially, and it'll heat up the asphalt that makes the surface, malleable, so you can rake it, and then you don't have to add a whole lot of material. We do add a little bit of new asphalt, but the goal of that is it gives us a much longer lasting patch. It still isn't really a permanent forever fix, but it's going to keep that pothole under control for quite a long time, especially if it's done right. As well as just hot patch, which is similar to that cold patch, but it's actually using hot asphalt and putting it in there and compacting it down, which is again better than cold patch. So that's I speak of potholes so much right now because that's going to be in our world, that's going to be on our mind for quite a while now. Other things to speak of, we mentioned garbage and recycling. That also falls under streets as well as street plowing. Mentioned concrete crew. What am I missing, Ernie? I mean, there's a lot. I could talk for probably an hour easily just going over some of the various things, but if you guys got the idea, I can take any questions on anything I said.
Okay, infrared patcher. So
Yeah.
what I'm hearing there's fewer trips being made out because the patches are lasting longer?
Yep. So fewer passes are being made out. Right now, starting next week with the temperatures, right? We're sending anything that we have that can patch. It's going to be out there, and that's not necessarily. We're not necessarily worried about getting everything perfect. We just want to make our main roads drivable. But then all throughout summer, we have our infrared crew, and they follow just generally our plow routes. And then when they do that, they're not going back that year, not for that patch, unless something was done incorrectly. But that's very rarely. So that is a benefit, and even most of the patches, they're going to last years, not just next season plow hits it. It's not going to rip it up. I mean, they look. You probably have seen quite a few of them. It almost looks, it'd be like a perfect square, and that's our infrared patcher. So that was a great addition that we had to our fleet to help reduce some of those.
Have you been able to quantify it to see if it paid for itself, on fewer trips, you've seen that efficiency?
Yeah, personally, yeah, 100%. And we've seen those efficiencies right out the gate. We had a little bit of a learning curve with it, but once we learned how to use it properly, no, we're not returning. Some of the early ones we may have gone back and repatched, but generally, no. It's a great tool that we have for our asphalt roads to really, and residents like it too, because when you drive over it, it's generally pretty smooth, instead of some of the holes you might see filled where, we do our best to level them off, but you're still going to get a little bit of a jarring driving over it. So it's got its benefits, for sure. The other thing we do at streets is we are the central fleet for the city. So I'm assuming that's going to be a big topic for this commission. Other than transit, just about every vehicle, cop cars.
The only thing we don't do is transit and ambulances.
Yep.
Everything else we do.
Yep.
Fire
So
trucks.
if it's a vehicle that's city owned, generally it's something that we're responsible for purchasing and maintaining. So we have 5 mechanics. One of our mechanics is dedicated just to parks equipment. Summertime, all the mowers, all the little pieces of equipment keeps that mechanic pretty busy. Our other mechanics are focused on anything we have. Squad cars is a big one. One thing is when it comes to fleet, some of the, sustainability or green initiatives that we have started, we got our first hybrid squad. Was it last year or the year before?
21.
2023,
my bad. 23.
Yeah, I was going to say I wasn't here then,
Yeah,
but
23, my bad.
and part of our green plan and our green initiative in the fleet is to really focus on, and the PD loves the hybrids as well. So we have 5 on order right now.
Total of 9.
Total of we just ordered 5 and we're waiting for some of our 2024s or 2024s to come in. So when those come in, we'll have a significant amount of our squad cars that are hybrid. And, you know, reason why electric isn't necessarily an option right now, our squad cars generally run 24/7. There's not, you know, there's not different fleets for different shifts. So, you know, one officer gets done with a shift, you know, another officer's jumping into that. So there's not significant time for downtime to charge. Some of the other initiatives that we've started, it's called right sizing our fleet. A couple individuals in streets are pretty involved with APWA, that's the American Public Works Association, and they have their own sustainability committees and green fleets, different initiatives, and we do try to follow a lot of those as best we can. You know, we do have challenges. One thing that was mentioned is our infrastructure. Currently, our building is underpowered for what we have. We found that out when we tried to purchase a different welder, and we don't have adequate facilities to even put in any charging stations at this point.
That was what I was curious about, is with that problem, I was like, what is the investment that would take into a new facility so that, say, we have enough charging stations for a hybridized fleet
Sure.
citywide? Like,
Well, as Scott did mention, I mean, there are efforts underway to, you know, looking into a new facility. You know, when I believe the facility we have now, we've done a lot of the quote-unquote low-hanging fruit type things for sustainability. I mean, we have converted to LEDs in the building, which is pretty significant when you add up what all the wattage is. At this point, given the age, I don't believe that it's really worth investing more in. You know, even if we decided that, no, we'll spend the money, we'll redo the roof, we'll put solar panels on, we'll upgrade the power. We still have other challenges we face with the building. You know, fire trucks are bigger than they were in '58 when the building was built, and so we do have challenges. Like in summertime, our mechanics will work on them outside, because otherwise we don't have room to maneuver anything inside. Same with our garbage trucks. So we have a very small footprint for the types of equipment we're working on. So as far as what it would take to get into a new building, that's above me. But
who
though,
should I be asking that one? Is that a comptroller question? Is that our planner question?
I would say that both, yeah, it's a Director Badoon, I'd say, yeah, comptroller, that's also, you know, it's council level, you know, type
We actually
type
do
discussions.
have a firm come in, they did do all the,
Yeah.
what we need, you know, the space that.
Well, and I'd be happy to share that because, yeah, I was a part of that. So we have concept plans drawn up for a new building. So the ball is in motion in that, but it's a very hefty price tag, and honestly that's where we're at. It's a matter of funding, and it's not a low price tag, you know, especially.
Where would we find that big concept plan?
I'd be,
We have it in our.
yeah, I can share it with you. Yep, there's been a couple different updates to it, you know, since I've been here. So yeah, I'd be more than happy to share that with anybody that'd be interested in it. You know, and our vision for a building like that's where we would be focused on, you know, what green initiatives initially when we buy it to make this, you know, as sustainable as a building for the years to come. So that is again, the building is a large challenge to why, you know, even we're challenged fleet-wise from a lot of equipment that we own and operate. There just isn't another replacement yet. We believe it's coming. Ernie attends the fleet government fleet expos pretty regularly, and there are a lot of discussions around, you know, green fleets at those. One thing that we found really positive. I found it positive. The last one we attended, when they're talking about different futures of vehicles, I do believe hydrogen is something that we're going to start seeing a lot more of. I believe it was I don't want to be misquoted, one of the major three brands in their presentation stated that they actually changed, they took 50% of their engineers that were working on their electric fleets and reallocated them to the hydrogen. I do believe electric has a place in our fleet, it needs to be right-sized. Some of the other right-sizing initiatives we did, if we don't need a large vehicle for what the purpose is, we're not going to purchase a large vehicle for that. So I'm actually, as superintendent role, instead of F-150, I can drive a Maverick. It's more fuel efficient, it's smaller footprint, costs less. So looking at those different vehicle types and right sizing vehicles, might seem small, but it's a pretty good step for what we're trying to accomplish.
Yeah, thinking of information would be useful to have. Could you also get us just a list of what even vehicles you have in your fleet? Because I see I see a price tag here, but I don't even know what that means in terms of I don't know, fire trucks versus garbage trucks versus.
Yeah, that's something we could provide to you.
Thank you.
Yeah. So I guess kind of the bottom line with fleet, it's an ongoing research for us. It is something that we're all about it. It's just we're challenged. Not just because of our building, but just what's available. I was looking at a grant last year. Unfortunately, we wouldn't have qualified for it, but Milwaukee owns an electric garbage truck. We did some research into that. It's not as easy, even if the price was the same as our other garbage trucks, it's not as easy as us just going, all right, let's get the electric one. Right now, Mack is the only manufacturer of that chassis, and we would have to be approved by them to even purchase one, for the reason being is they need to run various tests on what our routes are, what our temperatures are, to make sure that it's something that would actually be useful for us. So that's a challenge in that. Same with for lawnmowers and parks. I was talking to some of the Toro reps. They're interested in maybe looking at if there were electric commercial lawnmowers that would work for our parks. That came down to mostly cost issues, where I'm not exaggerating, they're about double the price of other mowers, and we run into different condition type issues. I think that technology will continue to improve, and I do believe we'll see them in our fleet. I just don't think we'll see them for a couple years, and I think there's other technologies coming out that the city would be very interested in investing in. Another sustainability point that I just really want to hammer home, something that in streets we're pretty proud of, is our salt usage. And it started, if we go back, 2014 is when we first started using brines and got a brine machine installed, so we actually make our own brine, which I can go into the benefits of it, but just from a salt usage standpoint, the only real data I brought with me for this meeting, I'd be happy to get any data you guys want, is that in a period from 2008 to the last season I did this was 23, our average salt use declined in that first period before we started brine from 08 to 14. Our average salt use in the city was 4,500 tons a year. Our average salt use now is just over 1,600 tons. So that's a very significant reduction of salt that we've done over at streets, with not just brine, but a combination of, our trucks have sensors. We actually take temperature of the road surface, And the technology that we have in our trucks will only put out the amount of salt that would be necessary to melt at that road temperature. Ground speed controls, so trucks going faster, it's going to spread more. But if you get up to a stop sign, you're not just your spinner's not just blasting everything. So that's a really significant reduction, not just salt's impact on the environment, but the trucking, the mining.
How many brine trucks do you have?
We have, it's kind of a trick question. We have one truck that's our big brine sprayer, like our pre-spray. So that's if the conditions are right, we'll go out before a storm, run our brine route, which is mostly our main routes. But all of our trucks have brine tanks on them. And so it's called pre-wetting our salt. So when we're putting salt down before it gets on the spreader, we're actually spraying brine on that salt. And what that does is it does two things mainly. It'll help the salt stick to the road. Instead of dry salt, it would come out the spreader, hit that hard surface, and bounce. So we can reduce the amount of salt and actually get the salt on the road with that. It also helps activate the salt a lot quicker, which is mainly a benefit for the road conditions and safety. But so all of them, but only one, if that answers your question.
Okay, so in salt usage efficiency, which is the more efficient way to be going about putting salt on our roads? Between, okay, all of them are, but we have one true brine,
So the brine truck that you're probably thinking of with the big tank in the bottom and the sprayers, there are some municipalities now starting to use them during a storm or during storm cleanup, but they're typically using usually slightly different chemicals for it to work better. What our goal is and why in the future I could see us getting an additional one and maybe we add to our brine route. That truck's sufficient for our operation now because this is all before the storm started. So this last storm we had rain. It wasn't a good storm to, poor example of when to use brine, but say you have generally dry conditions and the snowstorm's moving in. Typically that would be a good time for us to put brine down, and that'll actually dry to the road. And what we're trying to do with that brine is we're creating like a Teflon surface. So the first snowflakes hitting it will probably melt from just the salt that are on there, buys us a little bit of time to get in. The other thing that when it starts accumulating, instead of hard packing to the road, there's this little layer of salt there, so it's not packing onto the road, so when our plows go through, it moves it off more efficiently. So, we've actually, one of our fleets, sorry if I'm talking all over the place here.
Which would you guys prefer, I guess, to work with?
Probably our spreader salt trucks for what we're trying to accomplish in a storm. That's when we have all of our operators in, and that's just putting brine alone. There's some storms where that might work well, but a lot of them you're probably just not getting enough salt to really cut that ice or that slippery surface. I know there are municipalities that they're using like calcium chlorides or they're adding like magnesium chlorides. There's other chemical. There's a lot of different organic type materials now that are being used like we would use our salt brine, and some of those are more efficient during a storm. But
do you ever use them in combination? I've heard somebody ask me about beet juice.
The city actually experimented with beet juice. We experienced some issues with it. It has a little bit of a odor. It stains. We had wasn't well received by residents.
Thanks, you got a white car.
Yeah. So, but it's not necessarily just the beet juices. There's something called beet heat, which is it's from beet juice. I don't know all the chemistry, but it's supposed to help alleviate a lot of those issues that people are having with the staining. The other thing, beet juice could clog, it would, get into your small nozzles, and it just became more of a mess than it was a benefit. But hey, there are municipalities using cheese brine. Colorado, there's a couple of municipalities using beer brine. There's vodka, distilleries are selling, their high strength waste and converting it into different materials that are meant to melt ice to negative 30 degrees. So from that standpoint, we're nowhere near done with what we plan on doing with our salt use. I think that's a little bit of a pride thing we have at Streets, and we like to talk about it, and we're not done. We have a really good start, but we're not done.
So I was just thinking maybe if we could just end it right there.
Yeah.
If that's all right.
Absolutely.
This commission will probably want to circle around back in the future.
Yeah.
For conversations with the department with some more questions as this process develops. But one topic to kind of put in to give to you guys tonight that you can take back to think about for future discussion is when we talk about making our community more climate resilient to the changes that are occurring with climate and making it more resilient to those effects. When we talk about climate change in the lake states, we're talking about more frequency, severe storm events, different types of storm events. So how does that affect power, for example, or our electrical grid resiliency?
Sure.
With large rainfall events, what kind of flooding events could we experience? And then what would that do to, for example, to our facilities? Do we, for example, have facilities that are vulnerable to flooding, for example? If we would get, say, a 5 or 6 inch storm event, which, is more in the realm of possibility these days and more likely to occur. So that's sort of part of the other picture about this whole resiliency planning.
Right.
Is thinking about how we deal with heat events where we have multiple days or weeks of 90-degree plus temperatures. What does that do? How does storm events, heat events affect our electrical grid system? Mostly we're dependent on Wisconsin Public Service.
Yeah.
But if we're talking about facilities and updating facilities and installing solar or something, microgrids is a topic that's talked about, and it's along the lines of how do we make our municipal facilities more resilient in the event of natural disaster, natural disaster response.
Sure. That makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah, just thoughts for future discussion there.
Yeah, that's something we can come back with.
Okay.
Any questions at all?
Oh, I got too many, that's not.
Feel free to send me an email.
Thank you very
Yeah.
much, Chris. Just, you guys are obviously taking this very serious
Yeah.
and public.
Well, I mean, it's our community.
Led on many
Yep.
things.
Quick question, so when you described how kind of your department is taking care of the entire fleet except for transit and ambulances,
Yep.
and you're talking about like the building not having, the right things that you need. Thinking sustainability, thinking efficiencies, does that make sense to be, to have your department cover the entire fleet, or would it make more sense to have a mechanic station like for the fire stations and just PD?
That would be very difficult. Do you?
If you're looking at, you'd have to have lifts at every facility.
Okay.
You're talking a lot of money. Our lifts right now that need replacing are about $100,000 to lift the garbage truck or the fire truck.
Then you just answered.
Yeah.
You'd have to have it in every
We have,
facility. It's like-
yeah, if you're ever interested in touring, our facility,
Yep.
feel free to reach out. We can talk about a lot of these things, but I think a lot of these things, once you see it, it becomes a lot clearer what the operation looks like. As far as mechanics off-site, we also have our own stock room, which essentially, for explaining it to outside of our department, it's like our own O'Reilly's. You know, it's like the stock that we have for equipment that we have a stock clerk that makes sure that, you know, it doesn't leave the door without being accounted for. So having off-site facilities for that could be not impossible, but maybe I don't see it being any more efficient. Yeah.
Okay,
Awesome.
thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yeah, you guys have a great night. Yeah, I'd be more than, you have anything you wanna?
No, I'm good.
We brought him along if there was any questions.
Okay, so,
I'm gonna-
appreciate your time.
Thank you.
For the committee, we've got some more agenda items here to get through, and so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to kind of change it up a little bit, which I think is fine, because this is sort of our first meeting, okay? So, it's 7 o'clock. So, what I want to just discuss here is what we had on here. We had discussion on implementation of city ordinance to identify goals and objectives. And then also on item number 4, 2 and 4 kind of go together. And that's identifying potential topics and presentations to the commission to be accomplished in 2025. And then item number 5 is Adam Kuhn from our planning department is going to come to the April 3rd meeting at 5:30 to talk about the Wisconsin Local Government Climate Coalition and the greenhouse gas inventory grant that we have. He's going to talk to us about what all that is, as well as I went to, and I know some of the other commission members here went to that Stevens Point UWSP.
Carp?
Climate action and
Climate-
resilience planning?
Yes, climate action resilience planning exercise there. And I had a chance to talk with a person from the Department of Administration who works on exactly this topic that our commission is working on. And Katie Carmody, okay, so we're going to want to have her on a future agenda. She's from the Office of Sustainability and Clean Energy. Now, one of the things that she pointed out is they gathered up different municipality existing plans that they currently have. For example, we have a 2008 plan that sort of dealt with this topic. We could use that. We have a Green Tier legacy program with Wisconsin DNR. And we have the cooperative, I'll call it, bike and pedestrian plan with the county, and then probably a few other things that we can use to develop or update, is the way they would describe it, a climate and resiliency plan. So it's kind of going back and looking at what you already have and building upon that. And sort of what we heard in today's discussion from the streets department, there's many of these topics that we've already been thinking about and talking about. There's things that we're already doing. We have a forestry department, we plant trees. We also have them all GPS'd, we know where they all are. So we've got some tools and we've got some things that we're already working on. And we can sort of gather all that stuff together to help bring that into a plan that's up to date, that sort of draws on some of the past work that we've already done. And what she was telling me is that their group is coming up with a toolkit or sort of like a model plan that municipalities can use.
Okay, so the Office of Sustainability and Clean Energy, that's the statewide office?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. And then along with that, UWSP also has its own climate action resilience plan that it's been working on. And they're pretty far along in that process. So that's kind of another example of a template that already exists that we can look at. I think in your city emails you saw like a link from La Crosse's climate action plan is kind of another example. And The one thing I would say about La Crosse's plan is that's an example of, if you have the staff, and you have them develop a real comprehensive plan. So they had a lot of people that worked on that. And, my question for the commission here is, we're limited by numbers of people and resources that we have to work with. So I don't know exactly how our plan will develop, but we do have some tools out there, some people available, some potential roadmaps that we can use to sort of bring our own plan together. And I'm guessing then in future meetings that we're going to be able to put more and more meat on this skeleton that we're sort of, assembling here that can, really look like something we get, a year out from this process. I think we'll have something that looks more like a plan. At least that would be the objective. In the interest of time tonight, I guess what I would say then is, let's think about items 2, which is implementation of the city ordinance goals and objectives. Utilizing some of these, like La Crosse's plan, for example, touches on some climate resiliency actions in regards to land use and housing, buildings and energy.
Right.
Health and safety, which is kind of about ensuring equity amongst all residents in your city, making sure everybody benefits from this effort. Transportation and mobility and things, but sort of getting at more of what do we think is most important in our community, what are the things we want to prioritize first. And then potential topics for future presentations. We do have, or we're planning to have Adam Kuhn at our April meeting, and then beyond that, eventually we're going to have all the city departments present. So that's the goal. So we want to hear from everybody in the city. And the reason to do that is kind of what you're seeing tonight is there's stuff that we're already doing, and then it's stuff that we can leverage and build upon, and then the input of this commission and the planning that we do can help give direction, because you start with a plan and then you get down the road and you change direction. That plan evolves. Okay, and as these guys talked about, there's going to be new technology and new stuff coming down the pike that maybe tonight we probably are saying that we can't do, but then, a couple of years from now, it suddenly becomes, no, you can do that.
Piggyback on that point?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, I kind of feel like that's a bit of what we kind of stand as, like, in the best position to do is kind of look at what is coming and what needs to be studied and how to steer our departments to get our staff educated or trained in these emerging technologies or other sort of things that are coming along in the climate change initiatives. One of the things that I saw at the parks last month, a gentleman was giving a presentation and he was talking about the emerging carbon economy. And it would be interesting to see if we get a presentation on that or go to a place that's giving some sort of presentation, education seminar to learn what is the emerging carbon economy and how could our city learn how to benefit from that.
Yes, in fact, as the gentleman was speaking, I was starting to wonder, are we allowed to set sustainability commission meetings that okay, we are meeting at the Public Works Garage and our agenda is tour. Can we just say that's our next meeting?
I
Or
believe
not our
that
next
would be
one, but-
appropriate. I don't see why that would be inappropriate.
Yeah, I think you guys could do that.
As long as you notice it ahead of time.
Yeah.
Yes, exactly,
Exactly.
give the agenda properly, but just,
Okay,
We're
so,
And that would be probably a good place to start, too, would be the streets department, you know.
okay,
It's our biggest fleet.
Okay, so here's what I'm proposing to do for the commission, if you're okay with this, is, and this will be on your city email, is I'm just gonna put together a simple Word document with agenda items 2 and 4 on there. I have my own laundry list, so I'll just throw that on there, and then if you would look at that and add to that, and put your own thoughts and stuff on there, and then we can sort of roll that over into April, if you will, but it'll give us an opportunity to share that amongst the commission so that we all, start to put a definition on what we're doing and where we're going. So when I met with Scott, basically what I was describing for him, because he was kind of like, well, what do you want me to talk about? What are you guys trying to do? And I said, well, if you look at the ordinance, it includes everything from soup to nuts. But it could touch on all those areas, but it's about reducing our carbon footprint, reducing our greenhouse gas emissions, to deal with that topic of climate change, and then how do we make our community more resilient to climate change. And not surprisingly, most people that work in municipalities, most city employees, and a lot of different municipalities, this is a topic that's already being discussed and talked about. If you look at League of Wisconsin Municipalities website and their publications, if you look at Wisconsin Counties Association website and their publications, that's a topic that's already being discussed or has been discussed. And it's gonna continue because we're gonna have these weather events, whether we like it or not.
I was in Middleton in, I think it was 2018, where we had like 14 inches of rain
Right.
overnight, and despite being up on a hill, our septic tank flooded backwards into our basement. That is what the entire world is going to be dealing with.
Yes, and so, that's the why of doing all of this, is as a community, we have an obligation, as a municipality, municipalities all have obligations to pay attention to what's going on in the world, to protect their citizens, right? When the events happen, the citizens are gonna want the city to show up and know what to do. So we need to have an answer. We need to be ready. So I guess the other thing I just want to say on this agenda, there was item number 3, which is select a member to act as a commission liaison to the Green Tier Legacy communities. Now, I think we sent out a link about Green Tier that was in the, I don't know if you saw that or not.
I remember seeing
If you
that.
remember that. But the city is a member of Green Tier, that's a DNR program. If you want to Google that, you can find out what Green Tier is all about. So the city is a part of that. And when I was meeting with the mayor, putting together this agenda, he had brought that up, that maybe a commission member would want to serve as a member on the city's Green Tier Legacy program. Now, I don't know, we don't need to decide that tonight, or maybe we do, or maybe we don't. But that will be a topic for future discussion on a future agenda, is what I want to say about that. That'll go on that list of potential topics and presentations to the commission.
Do you think
We're
there's
not gonna have
other?
any actions tonight then?
I'm gonna say no actions for
No
tonight.
actions tonight, okay.
Yeah,
Do we need to officially table anything till next month, or can we just informally
We
table
can
it?
move to table the remaining items and have them placed on the next month's agenda.
Move to postpone.
Move to postpone?
If that's what you wanna do, but you don't have to.
okay, so,
Since it was all discussion.
Is that the?
Yeah.
You really don't have to
Postpone?
move to do anything.
Okay.
okay, so the proper motion would be a motion to postpone items 2, 3, 4 for until April's meeting.
I have a second.
Are you making the motion?
I'm making the motion.
Okay.
I'll second it.
Postpone.
And all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries.
Okay, and I'm sorry, I don't know what your names are.
Heather Phelps seconded.
Do that, Heather.
Yep, Sam Lang, motion.
Yep. You know you.
Okay.
I don't either.
Okay.
I would also like to request that the chair have a for discussion, possible other liaison. Could we have a liaison for each of the institutions of higher learning we have here? The Tech College, liaison to the University Stevens Point, or liaison to the UW Extension office here as well. I don't know if we need.
Are you volunteering?
I don't know if I got that kind of time, guys, but.
No, good point well taken. So, item number 4 for identifying potential topics and presentations, maybe that would be a good idea to sort of present there in terms of what your thought is, and yeah, you know, that could be certainly if the city is developing this type of plan, it makes sense to collaborate with the university and other entities. One thing we haven't discussed yet, but probably in the future would be when we talk about climate resiliency, when we talk about reducing our carbon footprint, reducing greenhouse gases, we have to have discussion with where we get our power from, Wisconsin Public Service, but also the business community. What are we doing for the individual homeowners? We have existing programs there that work towards efficiencies and resiliency. But when you, for example, when you talk about extreme heat, you know, that affects a lot of people because of air conditioning, and maybe their house is hard to cool, you know, things like that. So, yeah, that would be an example of something to put on the list to discuss for future topics.
That would be kind of your department, huh?
All of what you're saying
Yeah.
is all on me, so.
I know.
Like,
Curious,
it's
Doug,
all
would
good
you
stuff.
be
Ultimately,
interested
like,
in being a liaison
you know,
in
the
any
planner and me is
capacity to
saying,
any one of those
ultimately, who
things?
you all want to talk to, all the folks that you want to collaborate with, that's all part of the planning process early on. So once you really set forth the directive, you know, at this time, you want to go forward and create this climate action plan, climate action resiliency plan, that's really the time where you establish your list of stakeholders that you want to reach out to, have those individual and or small group conversations with them, because those are ultimately going to be one tool in the toolbox you use in terms of public engagement, to ultimately craft what you are recommending and in what way you're going to be fulfilling the recommendations in that plan.
Okay. Are you Adam Kuhn?
I am.
Okay, so I did send you an email. Whenever we can meet at your convenience.
Yep.
Yeah, because I would love to sit and talk with you to just sort of line all this out. So just for the rest of the commissions, I was glad I went to that UWSP seminar because that was sort of a revelation. Like, yeah, this is what we want to do. You know, whereas prior to this, I'm kind of like, what did I sign up for? And wow, you know, this is how do we wrap our arms around this thing and figure out what it is we want to do and what direction we want to move in and what are we trying to produce? You know, something that's going to be useful, right? So I feel a lot more confident, and I feel a lot more confident after tonight that we're going to slowly bring this thing, the picture's going to come together.
I'll just say, just to add on that, Chair, you know, typically the route that a community takes, not here just in Wisconsin, but across the nation, is if the end goal is you want to create this climate action plan, really the first goal that you have to fulfill is to really establish that baseline, which I'll be talking about next month with the greenhouse gas inventory, right? Greenhouse gas inventory, once you accumulate all that information, really there'll need to be a period between myself, between you folks to disseminate the data and to really formulate what areas amongst our emission categories that we're doing well at in terms of decreasing, what's some problem areas, and what's some forecasting tools we can use to see how's that all going to be shaping out in the next 10, 20, 50 years. Once you have that, at that point is really when you can start formulating a process for this climate action plan. I say this in that, you know, great conversations that you're having, don't get me wrong, not necessarily all that needs to be flushed out even, you know, this winter, this spring, right? There's a little bit of time that's needed. I just want to make sure that we're not you as a commission, that we're not rushing too far along, not rushing too far along, just since there's some stages that have to be completed first, but before you have to get to that point.
Okay, and that would be good to understand, kind of what those realistic timelines are.
Yeah.
And then, but realistically too, that also gives us time to continue with having these meetings with the different department heads. Because I think a part of that process is the department heads are learning what it is the commission's trying to do. And one of the interesting things is that if you got a problem or issue to solve, city employees are a wealth of information and ideas about, so you want to try to do this. Oh, okay, well, we could try this, we could try that. And then oftentimes you find out that, we got this association meeting of salt truck drivers, and we've been talking about how to, and you realize that, there's a lot of innovation that comes out of that just by talking to the city employees, and, they come up with really good ideas. If we tell them what we have on our mind, if we understand what it is we're trying to solve.
So I think the people that you're going to be reaching out to try to solicit some information, I think one of the things that's key, if the end goal is to create this climate action plan, is, there's one of two approaches, there's two different approaches that communities have done when creating a climate action plan in terms of kind of the meat on the bones of the plan. The first route is kind of focus on some key topic areas and go knee deep in the weeds. I think a good example is, I think about a year and a half ago, City of Eau Claire adopted their climate action plan, and one of their niches, so to speak, that they prioritized was garbage and recycling collection, right? So that's one avenue that communities have done, is kind of have more of a narrowly tailored scope, addressing certain topic areas, and then just go pretty hardcore in establishing what you want to go within those areas. The other approach that communities have done is kind of more 30,000 foot view, identify all the different components that make up or that contribute to our overall greenhouse gas inventory, and then provide some general, generic recommendations within each of those categories. I think our pathway to a sustainable Stevens Point document, our, I guess, de facto existing climate action plan, more so takes that latter approach where it addresses every single nook and cranny, all things from food and nutrition, all the way to infrastructure specific, like what we heard this evening. So I think that's one of the things, my recommendation to you folks as a commission is kind of think in the back of your mind, which one of those two paths do you want to go down? Focus on specific examples and go pretty deep and intense on those specific topics, or would you rather have more of a comprehensive document that doesn't necessarily go into as much detail, unless you want a 500-page document, then by all means go forward with that. But
Okay, this is very helpful.
appreciate it.
And I would recommend to us that we take the first path on that.
I think so.
Where we're looking at something very deep and specific, and maybe this is discussion further, but broad plans tend to get put to the side. Just like we have one already that we're ostensibly following, there was one even before that. That is in the waste or the dustbin of filing cabinets. So the broader you are, the less likely action's gonna take, would be my input on that.
Yeah, because it's harder to prioritize and you end up not prioritizing and.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, I kind of like the idea of just, picking like 3 or 4 areas maybe, and just doing a deep dive. Because I think it'd just be easier to like do that too and like focus on an area. Because then you're not kind of getting like sidetracked by like all these other little things that we could be doing, So it's like, I think, just having a good like focus on one topic at a time would really probably benefit us. And I like the garbage recycling, that's just my day job, so that's my vote.
And thankfully, there's a lot of stuff going on. Like I know at some point I'll talk about zoning code rewrite and while
Yeah.
that may not necessarily have to be a standalone topic in this climate action plan, because I hope wherever closest wood, piece of wood is, that will be done before this climate action plan is adopted.
Sure.
You folks obviously can contribute in other ways to certain sustainability areas, even though it won't be included in this climate action plan, right? Just since the city's thankfully involved in a lot of different areas all at once.
Okay. Any other discussion or comments for the good of the order? If not, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn. Thank you all for coming tonight and sticking it out.
I would move to adjourn.
Okay, motion by Sam Lang and
Second,
second by
Burke.
Allison Burke.
Ellison Burke. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay.
Thank y'all for coming.